So the truth is I keep starting work on my piece and forget about you guys, and I just start doing it, and then I realize, oh, I didn't film that. So I trimmed out the two sides of my wall piece, and once I put one side where I thought it would be good to trim down this edge, once I had done that with my mat the long way, and I was careful not to cut off the edge because my island is not quite as long as this mat in this direction. And then I turned it this way. Then I matched it up on this side and trimmed it here, and then pulled this down, still keeping it nicely matched over here, and then I trimmed this side. And so you can kind of go like this and see if, you know, you can always, because these have so much stretch, you can always stretch them to match, but what you want to see is, are they naturally in a relaxed state pretty close. Then what I did was I put it on here and I matched it up nice and straight, and then I came over here and I cut off my bottom. So then the last part for me to do is my top, and you can figure out what's the best way for you to position your work and try to get things as square as you can. And just remember that this all kind of stretches, and so you want to not stretch it and cut it. You want to have it in a relaxed state where it's doing what it really wants to do, and then cut it so that you're really cutting it without you exerting any extra influence on it, because once you're not holding it that way anymore, of course it's just going to revert to its true shape. Look at it and see if you really think you need to change anything, and then if you do, just face it and do it. Okay, so I matched these up. It seems like it's just a titch wider at the bottom. So I'm going to cut a little bit off the bottom. Now let's see. And I did have everybody vote on what kind of binding we should do, straight or wavy, and people wanted wavy. I'm not going to do the same wavy that I did in an earlier video, which I'll put up on the screen if you want to take a look at that. But I'm going to do one where it's fairly straight on the outside edge, not perfectly straight, but then it's wavy on the inside, which is kind of a favorite little move that I sometimes do. Before that, I'm going to address this area right here where I have exposed batting in two spots. And I may do a little bit on this area here. There are just a couple of holes in the paint from my sewing machine needle when I did my basting. So these flaws fall right in the zone underneath the hanging sleeve, and so I'm going to fix that however I'm going to do it before I bind this. Okay, I also have what I call thread pile-ups. I have a couple here and then over here. But if I come up with some element to put over here, I might also put it over there and through there. It might just be some wonky satin stitching. I do kind of like the way that looks in the sky. You can pull in a color from somewhere else. To fix these little places that I'm trying to fix, all I'm going to do is put this scrap of fabric over the top, and I'm going to mark right where the problem areas are so I don't forget to actually fix them. I never used to mark. I just would eyeball stuff, and then I would make a fix and it would halfway cover the thing I was trying to cover, or it wouldn't cover it at all. So that's why I try to always mark now. My thread matches my stitching over there, and I'm going to do a similar stitching, just a little bit of it. Of course, as usual, I end up making this up as I go along. I end up making 3 little peacock feathers, and then I only decide to trim the 2 on the sides because the middle one I could end up exposing the same batting again. And I try to give it a good nail brushing to fray it up since it's not going to be washed. And I want what is going to fray over time to fray now. And then I trim it up so that it looks good. And with this kind of minimal repair, I don't worry that my top is stretched out. If I extensively did this, I would go make sure on my cutting mat that it was all squared up still, and I would make any adjustments that I needed to. I'm not sure which binding is actually going to look the best, but I think I'm just going to do black. I would do a nice brown, the same brown that I do with the trees if I had enough of that on hand, but I don't. And so I'm just going to do black, sort of like, it'll be like that, although the binding comes onto the wall hanging, and the wall hanging stays approximately the same size. It gets a tiny bit smaller because it's turned, but it'll have this sort of black binding, black container for the image. So my piece measures 31 inches by 28 inches. So that's how big I'm going to cut my piece of black. We're actually going to pin this behind, and then we're going to stitch around it. And we're using this big piece of fabric, but we're really just going to use the very edge of it. The center part we'll have to use for other projects. And I wanted to show you, just so that everybody's clear. If I pin this behind here with my wrong side to this right side, and then stitch it, when it essentially gets turned like this and stitched, it's going to be my right side of my fabric up front here. If I go wrong sides to wrong sides, which I don't think I've ever done, but you might want to do it if you were very brave and you were willing to have people say, that's the wrong side of that fabric. Sometimes you can't tell. You know, when you use those little bits in watercolor quilting that are upside down, you can't tell. And there's a style of Hawaiian clothing that was very popular when I was a kid, where they used the wrong side of Hawaiian fabrics to make clothes. And so I actually love this look, but I know it's an association with that. To many people, this looks wrong. So we're essentially going to have this flipped over here, and then we're going to stitch it a lot like, not this exact stitching, but it's the same type of a thing, where we're doing a free form binding on the front. And I'm only going to do one color. The picture I showed earlier had black and gold. I'm just going to do black. But so if you're using a batik, batiks are basically the same on both sides, except for some batiks actually have a very distinct right side and a wrong side. But most batiks are the same front and back, and we're going to pin it in the back. But if you decide to use a regular fabric that's a print or something like that, that obviously has the color more on one side than the other, then you want to go ahead and pin the wrong side of your quilt to the right side of your binding, unless, as I say, you want to go the other direction, you know. So this is what you're going to end up with if you pin the way that I'm recommending. Okay, so I'm just going to pin this all the way around, and nothing too exciting about that. It's got to be done. Okay, so I'm going to stitch around this, and I'm not sure if I'm going to go straight or bobble in a little bit. And my stitch length is about a 2, and my needle is pushed over. Then I'm going to trim out most of the black fabric, press it really well, and then free motion quilt it and trim that, brush it with my nail brush, and then trim off that. Here's what it looks like stitched out, and now I'm going to cut away the part that I don't need. I'm going to leave myself a couple inches so that I have some room to create some interest. So I'm just going to pull this up and get started. This is another time when your trim tolerance matters. You really don't want to get any closer than what this looks like right here, 1/8. I'm going to trim my corners. Like that. I'm going to trim my corners like this. And each one of these little dips, I'm going to dip in. It's still close to 3/16 there. And I'll decide later if I actually need to trim these straight parts. Now, this corner is a little rounded looking. I'm okay with that. So press your work flat using a lot of steam. Try not to press the rest of your design too much. It's going to look like this on the back. It's going to have a border of black on the back, in some places a little more than in others. And to me that's okay. What I'm trying to avoid is having it be where the color actually shows on the front. So I'm actually purposely letting it roll somewhat to the back. This has some play, and so it's up to you to press it where you want it to lay. So this is what it looks like on the front, and this is my chance, if I don't like it, to fix it. And if I flip it over, this is what it looks like on the back. And you can see that I've allowed quite a bit of black in different parts. And I could change that if I wanted, and I could iron it all the other way, but I'm okay with this. And I seem to prefer to start stitching over here. I just think the eye flows down to here, and that any irregularities as you start and stop might be less noticeable. In the interests of letting this relax a little bit through here, I'm just cutting this a little bit into there, and I'm going to do it differently, but on all my corners. But I thought I would just sort of do this type of a thing, where you're just sort of making something that looks kind of like a seed, and then maybe I do 3 or 5 of these kinds of things, and build the area, the width out a little bit, and then go back to just doing the little 3, where it's kind of like almost like a little seed pod. And so I think I'm just going to do something like that. And then, I don't know if I'll do a final, sometimes I do this kind of thing. It just depends as I'm doing it how I like how thick the stitching is getting and that sort of thing. But so I'm just gonna start and I'm gonna get going on it and see how it works for me. And I'll try to get you up close and tight on the stitching. I appreciate all the support you guys are giving me, and I wanted to hit you up again if you do Pinterest or Facebook or Twitter or Google Plus. It turns out that these days Google looks at whether or not you're present on social media when it ranks you in search results, and I'm trying to turn the online stuff, including the YouTube videos, into something that replaces part of the income that I would be making if I were putting this time into making and selling stuff. And so I appreciate anything you can do. You know, you can like me on Facebook and then unfollow me. Even that is a big help, because of course the more likes you have, the more legitimate people feel you are when they first encounter you and they're trying to decide if they like what you're doing or not and trust you. So anything that you can do to help me with that. Also, I'm going to do 3 to 5 gift tutorials coming up as quick as I can. I may even have them overlap the last little bit finishing up this quilt. We're going to do an apron, a flax eye bag, and a leaf pot holder first, and then I'm going to try to come up with 2 other things. And so if you have thoughts on things you'd like to see me do a tutorial on, I'm not talking about something huge and complicated. I'm talking about something that, you know, you could make a few of them as gifts in an afternoon for people if you had a good set of instructions. Next time on this video, I'm hoping to get it finished up, although I won't let the video go longer than 15 or 20 minutes. I anticipate that on the next video we will make a sleeve that we hand sew onto the back of the quilt, and talk about the lath that the quilt needs to hang. And then I'm probably going to do a little satin stitching in the white part of my sky and some beading in the foreground. I'm even thinking about possibly masking off one part of my foreground and doing a little metallic paint splatter just for kicks. I actually like splattering paint a lot. It's messy and I think it's really pretty, and I've learned that you usually don't want to do red.